The city of Judea was cloaked in an unnatural gloom, thick clouds brooding low in the sky, casting an oppressive shadow over the land. The once vibrant hues of the bustling streets were muted under the grey veil, and even the faintest hint of sunlight seemed banished by the ominous atmosphere. The air was heavy, as though it carried a warning, and a chill that belied the season crept through the streets. Traders paused mid-transaction, their hands faltering over weights and coins, while mothers drew their children closer, whispering prayers under their breath. The air was charged, pregnant with a tension that seemed to echo through the ancient walls of the city. High on the palace terrace, King Herod stood, his gilded robes fluttering slightly in the wind as he gazed over the city. His face, usually a mask of calculated composure, betrayed a flicker of unease. The king had seen many skies over Judea, but never one like this. His sharp eyes swept over the horizon, narrowing as he took in the restless movements of his subjects below. The marketplace, the courtyards, the temple steps, all seemed to bear the same palpable sense of foreboding. He frowned, his mind racing. Was it a storm, or something more? The shift in the air did not go unnoticed by the people. Merchants whispered of bad omens, priests muttered ancient psalms, and children clung to their parents with wide, frightened eyes. The very stones of Judea seemed to pulse with unease. Stories of celestial signs and prophecies whispered in the darker corners of the city began to take on new life. The thick clouds seemed to press down on the people, a tangible weight that made each breath laborious. Some claimed to have seen flashes of light through the cloud cover, strange and ethereal, while others spoke of dreams. Visions of a child, a star, and a kingdom not of this world. Herod turned abruptly and strode back into the opulent halls of his palace. The gold-encrusted walls and intricate mosaics, usually a source of pride, felt cold and hollow. He summoned his advisors, his voice clipped and sharp. "Bring me the priests," he commanded, "and the astrologers. I want to know what this means." The king's words carried through the palace like the toll of a bell, and soon the corridors buzzed with activity. Priests in flowing robes and scholars clutching scrolls were ushered into the throne room. They bowed low before Herod, their faces pale. They knew the king's temper, and they knew his paranoia. His power was absolute, and his wrath was swift. Herod's dark eyes pierced through the gathered men. "Speak," he demanded. "What do the signs in the heavens foretell?" The chief priest stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. "My lord, the prophecies speak of a Messiah, a king born to the line of David. The star, it could be a sign of his coming." Herod's jaw tightened. "A king," he said softly, though his tone was laced with venom. "Do you mean to suggest a threat to my throne?" The priest hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The scriptures speak of a spiritual kingdom, my lord. Not one of this earth." Herod's lips curled into a thin smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "A spiritual kingdom," he repeated mockingly. "Tell me, priest, do spiritual kingdoms need kings? Do they challenge thrones?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Herod's gaze swept over the trembling men, his mind already calculating. He had spent a lifetime defending his crown, crushing rebellion and eliminating rivals. He would not allow a prophecy or a child to unseat him. "Leave me," he commanded, "but remain within the palace. I may have more questions for you." As the priests and scholars retreated, Herod paced the throne room, his thoughts a storm of suspicion and rage. His spies had brought whispers of travelers from the east, men of wisdom who spoke of a star and a king. He would summon them, but first he needed a plan. Power was a fragile thing, and he had sacrificed too much to let it slip away. Outside, the clouds seemed to grow darker, their weight pressing down on the city like a shroud. The people of Judea waited with bated breath, their hearts heavy with the unshakable feeling that the winds of change were blowing, and that those winds carried both hope and dread. Their journey was driven by the sighting of a star unlike any they had ever seen. A star so brilliant it seemed to sing with a celestial voice, calling them to follow. The road they traveled was treacherous, winding through barren deserts where the sun blazed mercilessly by day and the cold bit sharply by night. Their camels trudged onward, their hooves sinking into the shifting sands, while the men shielded their faces from the stinging winds that carried whispers of distant storms. Each night they gathered around a small fire, their voices low as they spoke of the prophecy that had brought them together. Frigid nights, guided only by the distant star. They were men of wisdom, yet even they could not comprehend the full magnitude of what they pursued. At night, when the fires flickered low and the camp fell quiet, they would stare at the heavens and whisper among themselves of the prophecy. "A child born to be king," Gaspar said one night, his voice low, "and yet no palace, no throne. He lies in Bethlehem, in the humblest of places." Balthazar nodded, his gaze fixed on the star. Perhaps that is the miracle. That heaven would descend to earth in such a way. Days later, the Magi arrived at Herod's palace. The air inside was heavy with incense and deception, the king's golden finery gleaming like the false light of a gilded trap. Herod received them with open arms, his smile like oil poured over still water. "Welcome, wise men of the East," Herod said smoothly, though his dark eyes betrayed the fire of suspicion. "Tell me, what brings such esteemed travelers to my humble kingdom?" The Magi exchanged wary glances, but Melchior stepped forward. "We seek the one who is born King of the Jews," he said carefully. "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Herod's smile faltered, though he quickly recovered. Yes, of course," he said, his tone soft and calculated. "But tell me, where is this child? When did the star appear to you?" The Magi spoke cautiously, their voices guarded. "The star has led us here," Melchior said. "We know not his exact place, but we will find him soon." Herod nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the gilded arm of his throne. His smile returned, though it was a mask for the darkness growing within him. "When you find him, come back to me," he said softly. "Tell me where he lies, so that I too may worship him." The Magi bowed, but as they left, their hearts felt troubled. Something in the king's voice rang false. Outside the palace walls, the wind howled, carrying with it a silent warning that only the wise could hear. Herod watched them go, his smile vanishing as soon as they disappeared. He turned to his guards, his voice low and venomous. "They will not return. Find the child, kill him, and leave no heir alive." The order spread like a plague, whispered into the ears of soldiers who sharpened their swords with trembling hands. For even the hardest of men hesitated at such cruelty, to slay infants, to erase an entire hope before it could bloom. But Herod's will was law, and the soldiers marched forth under the cover of night. In the quiet village of Bethlehem, nestled among hills and olive groves, a humble stable lay beneath the great star's glow. Inside, Mary cradled the infant Jesus, her face pale yet serene, her eyes soft with a love that seemed endless. The child slept peacefully, his breath warm against her chest. Beside her, Joseph stood watch, his rough hands gripping a worn staff, his eyes fixed on the stable door. Outside, the night was still, as though the entire world paused to bear witness to this moment. Suddenly, a soft creaking broke the silence, and the door swung open. Light poured into the stable, golden and warm, as the Magi entered. Their faces were aglow with awe, their hands carrying treasures fit for a king. One by one, they knelt before the child, their voices trembling as they spoke. "We bring gifts," Melchior said, placing a chest of gold at the child's feet. "Gold for a king." Balthazar opened a vessel of frankincense. "Incense for a god," he whispered. Finally, Gaspar stepped forward, his hands shaking as he presented a jar of myrrh. His voice broke as he said, "Myrrh, for one who will die." Mary looked up at them, her eyes deep with understanding. She knew the weight of these gifts. She knew this child's path would not be one of ease or earthly glory. And yet there was peace in her gaze, a peace born of something eternal. Outside, the star blazed brighter, its light swaddled in cloth, his tiny face calm, untouched by the chaos brewing beyond those walls. There was a quiet majesty to him, a serenity that made the crude manger feel like a throne. In that place, the humblest of spaces, heaven kissed earth, and eternity had begun to write its story through a child. Miles away, the soldiers were already on the move. Herod's men spread across the countryside like locusts, their torches flickering as they rode through villages and towns. Their orders were cruel and absolute, to root out any male child under 2 years of age. Fear gripped the people of Bethlehem like a fist. The peace of night shattered as cries rang through the streets, mothers clutching their children, fathers pleading with the soldiers for mercy that would not come. But even as Herod's wrath descended, another force was at work, one far greater than the ambitions of a jealous king. In the dead of night, Joseph awoke suddenly, his breath caught in his chest. Before him stood an angel, radiant and unearthly, bathed in light that seemed to drive away the very darkness of the stable. "Joseph, son of David," the angel spoke, his voice like thunder softened by a whisper. "Rise. Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I bring you word, for Herod seeks the child to destroy him." Joseph's heart raced, but he did not hesitate. He turned to Mary, whose eyes widened in silent understanding. Time was short. They could not linger. Gently, Joseph lifted the sleeping child into his arms, wrapping him carefully to protect him from the cold of the night. Mary gathered what few belongings they had, her hands shaking as the weight of the moment settled over her. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. The journey began under the cover of darkness. With each step, the world seemed to hold its breath. Joseph led the way, his calloused hands steady on the reins of the small donkey that carried Mary and the infant Jesus. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of sand and silence illuminated only by the glow of the star above. Behind them, the distant cries of mothers still echoed, Bethlehem's lament rising like smoke to the heavens. It was a journey of desperation, but also of deliverance. Every mile they traveled placed greater distance between them and Herod's wrath. The desert was unforgiving, yet they pressed on, driven by a strength that was not their own. Mary held Jesus close, her tears falling silently as she whispered prayers into the night. She was young, but in her heart she carried an unshakable faith, one that had brought her through angelic visitations, a scandalous pregnancy, and now this, the flight of a family hunted by kings. In Herod's palace, the days dragged on as the king waited for the Magi to return. But days turned into weeks, and no word came. Realization struck Herod like a dagger. The Magi had defied him. They had left quietly, warned in a dream not to return to the king who sought destruction. Herod's rage boiled over, consuming him like a fire that could not be quenched. His screams echoed through the stone corridors, shaking even the bravest of his servants. "Kill them all," he bellowed, his face contorted in fury. "Every male child in Bethlehem, let none escape." Thus began the massacre, a night so stained with blood that it would forever be remembered as a shadow upon history. Soldiers stormed into Bethlehem like wolves, their swords glinting in the torchlight. Wails of grief rose into the heavens as innocent lives were taken, their cries mingling with the sounds of shattering pottery, splintering doors, and the unrelenting beat of hooves on stone. Yet through all of Herod's wrath, the child was gone. Far beyond the reach of soldiers, beyond the grasp of a mad king, Jesus lay safely in Mary's arms as they traveled deeper into Egypt. The family's escape was more than luck. It was providence, divine protection that could not be broken by earthly power. Herod's madness grew with every passing day. Though he had unleashed horror upon Bethlehem, the child he feared had escaped him. The king's paranoia consumed him, twisting his mind until even the silence of his palace seemed to mock him. He paced the great halls like a caged beast, his crown slipping crooked on his brow. Whispers filled his mind. Was the child still out there? Would he rise to claim the throne? Would his name become a curse upon Herod's house? It was said that Herod's end came as it does for all tyrants, not in glory, but in despair. Sickened in body and spirit, he lay in his grand chamber, the walls of his palace seeming to close in on him. The whispers of prophecy that once haunted him had turned into a roar, drowning out all other thoughts. The star, now faded from the heavens, still burned in his memory, a symbol of the truth he could not silence. In the land of Egypt, far from Herod's kingdom, the Holy Family found refuge among strangers. The desert sands turned golden beneath the rising sun, and the cries of Bethlehem were carried far away on the wind. For years they lived quietly, their days filled with humble work and the laughter of a growing child who held eternity in his gaze. The world did not know it yet, but salvation had come. A tyrant's power had proven fleeting, but the life of the child he sought to destroy would endure forever. One day, that same child would rise, not with swords or armies, but with words that would shake the foundations of empires and heal the hearts of nations. For now, though, the desert remained quiet. And in the arms of his mother, the child who was called Emmanuel, God with us, slept peacefully, his breath steady and calm as the dawn broke over Egypt. The light of the world had come, and though darkness had tried to overcome it, it had failed. The star that once blazed above Bethlehem had faded, but its message remained. A king had been born, and his kingdom would have no end.